It was Christmas 1990, and the Tiede family had a special plan. They were going to spend the holiday at their quiet, cozy cabin in the snowy woods of Park City, Utah. They called it the Tiede Tranquility, a place filled with peace, fun, and love. But what started as a joyful family trip turned into a nightmare they would never forget. Today, we'll look into what really happened that winter. The Tiede family included Kay and Rolf, the parents, and their three kids, Lene, Tricia, and Sean. Lene and Sean were adopted, then Kay got pregnant with Tricia, who was born just 7 months after Sean. The kids were all close in age and loved each other like best friends. For this Christmas trip, they also brought along Kay's mother, Beth Potts. The whole family had moved to Texas, but they were always excited to come back to Utah, where Kay's family still lived, to celebrate the holidays. This year, they came a few days early to set things up for a big family party at the cabin. But Sean, who was 17, didn't want to go to the cold cabin right away. So he stayed behind with his aunt Claudia and her husband, who lived nearby. Sean loved his aunt, and she didn't mind having him around. Then, some bizarre things started to happen. A few days later, Claudia's husband got a phone call from the Summit County Sheriff. The sheriff asked if they could come pick up Lene and Tricia. Claudia's husband listened quietly, and when the call ended, he turned to Claudia and said only that there had been an accident. And then he didn't say much more. Claudia, her husband, and Sean were supposed to meet the rest of the family at the cabin for the party the next day. Now, they were rushing to pick up 2 girls instead. None of them knew what had really happened, or at least they wouldn't know yet. So the family had arrived in Utah in 2 groups. First, Kay and Sean flew in together. Then the next day, Rolf flew in with Lene, who was 20, and Tricia, who was 16. The Tieds always flew separately just in case something were ever to go wrong. They wanted to make sure not everyone was on the same plane. When Rolf, Lene, and Tricia arrived at the cabin on December 21st, Kay told Rolf that she and Claudia had met a strange man out on the road. Kay was worried. Something didn't feel right. She told Rolf to go get the guns from the car, and she said a strange boy was hanging around and he didn't belong there. Claudia, Kay's sister, thought that this was pretty strange. Kay wasn't the type to just get scared, and she was considered to be pretty tough, brave, and relatively strong. She didn't like to play the victim and didn't let other people act that way either. So for her to be this worried, it meant that something was wrong. Rolf didn't take it seriously at first, he just sort of brushed it off. But Kay kept telling him since she had a bad feeling, which I break in. If anybody ever tells you that they got a weird feeling about somebody, I talk about this on my main channel a lot, but it's called mirror neurons, and mirror neurons essentially help you identify micro expressions in the face, and there's even some evidence to possibly suggest that telepathy could be evolving within humans, and this, again, take that with a grain of salt. But the point is that micro expressions in the face sort of give a hint as to what your intentions are, and it has developed over time because humans being social creatures, you need to know what somebody might be thinking or if they have bad intentions. And if you have a bad feeling about somebody, go with your gut instinct because something is wrong. Anyways, so she even had to beg him to go get the guns before he finally listened, and that's how scared she was. Claudia remembered seeing the boy too. He looked like he was in his early 20s. He was tall and thin, wearing a light jacket, jeans, and tennis shoes. When they tried to talk to him, he didn't say anything. He just stood there. That made Kay feel even more uncomfortable. That night, before Rolf and the girls arrived, Kay even asked Claudia to stay with her just in case. But Rolf thought everything was fine. He told Kay he had seen a young guy stuck in the snow on a snowmobile and had helped him out. That boy had been polite and thankful. Rolf thought maybe that was the same person, but he was wrong. What they didn't know was that there were 2 boys, and both of them meant trouble. The next day, December 22nd, the family went to Salt Lake City to shop. It was a long trip. To even get to the cabin, they had to ride snowmobiles before reaching their car. Still, they were pretty much used to it. Kay, her mom Beth, and daughter Lene came back first at around 1:45 p.m. Rolf and Tricia stayed behind to pick up a snowmobile and planned to come back about an hour later. But around 3 p.m., something horrible would happen. Rolf's brother Randy would make a 911 call. He was on his way to the cabin for the family Christmas party, but the cabin was deep in the snowy woods and the phone signal wasn't too good. The call kept cutting out and he couldn't tell the dispatcher everything. Only one thing came through though: we need help. Randy had been riding his snowmobile up the long 2-mile path to the cabin when he saw another snowmobile coming towards him. At first glance, he couldn't really tell who it was, but as the person got closer, Randy saw that this man was hurt. His face was swollen and he was covered in blood. Then Randy would realize who this person was. It was his brother, Rolf. Rolf could barely speak. He was hurt so badly he was almost unconscious, but he managed to say 3 words to his brother: "Save my girls." That was all Randy needed to hear. He didn't know what had happened, but he knew he had to act fast. He pulled Rolf onto his snowmobile and then sped down the mountain to the nearest gas station. There, he found a payphone and called 911 again, and this time, he was able to tell them more. Someone had been hurt and 2 girls had been taken. Help would come fast. A rescue helicopter arrived just minutes later, and the police officers from every nearby town were sent to this area. Well, this kind of crime didn't usually happen in this quiet place of Utah. A murder and a kidnapping, it shocked pretty much everyone. Now police were searching the mountains for the girls and then the men who had taken them. Rolf was airlifted to the hospital. Randy, still shaking with fear, joined the search for his nieces, but Lene and Tricia didn't know any of this. In fact, nobody knew exactly what had happened at that cabin. They knew Rolf had been badly beaten, they knew the girls were missing, but they didn't know how terrible things really were. The Tiede family's car, a Lincoln Town car, was spotted and police sent out emergency alerts. Officers from all over the area searched for it, and then the Summit County Sheriff ended up finding it. Then they began chasing the car. It was a fairly wild ride. The car sped through the snow, swerved, and then rolled backward down a hill and almost went off a cliff. But somehow it came to a stop at the bottom without flipping over. Then came a fairly tense moment. There was a standoff. Shots were fired, but in the end, the girls would end up being rescued. The 2 men had taken them, but then they were caught. But what police didn't know yet was just how horrible this attack had been. Later, Lene told them what had happened. She said that when she and her mom Kay, as well as her grandma Beth, got back to the cabin around 2 p.m., she saw something fairly odd. She thought she saw someone inside of the master bedroom window, but then the person quickly ducked out of sight. She didn't feel scared. She thought maybe it was her cousin David playing a surprise trick. Lene was the first one to go inside. She says that her hands were freezing and she wanted to run warm water over them. Kay said okay, and Lene promised to come back out to help carry in the shopping bags afterwards. She went upstairs, smiling, thinking that she might catch her cousin hiding. But instead, she saw a man. He was wearing her dad's sweatshirt and he was pointing a gun at her. The man asked who else was downstairs as Lene told him, her mom and her grandma. Then he told her to call them up. Terrified, Lene did what she was told. Kay helped her elderly mother, Beth, up the stairs, having no idea what was waiting for them. And just like Lene, they were met with a gun pointed straight at them. The 2 men told them to sit down, but Kay didn't listen. She was stronger, just like her sister Claudia had said, and she wasn't the kind of person who followed orders from just anyone. Lene watched as the men started grabbing everything that they could. Kay tried to calm them down. She said, "Take anything you want. I have jewelry, I have money." The men then stuffed those things into their pockets, but then they started shooting. They shot Kay 3 times. Beth, her mother, stood up to try to help her daughter, but then the men shot her too 3 times. Grandma Beth collapsed next to Kay, and Lene had to watch it all happen. One of the men would look down and then say, "This woman won't die," and then pointed the gun at her head and shot her twice more. And it's people like this that need to be blood-eagled in the woods somewhere while still living. Lene started to pray, and she was scared and shaking, but one of the men told her he didn't believe in God. Again, go send him to his maker. Blood-eagle this little douchebag in the woods somewhere. He then said he worshipped Satan. Blood-eagle this guy in the woods straight up. So he told her praying wouldn't help. Sorry, I can't stand people like this. It's like, oh, you're so edgy, bro. Put down the gun. Let's see how edgy you truly are. Okay, I'm getting... All right. So then they dragged Lene into a bedroom. She screamed, so they shoved a dirty sock in her mouth and then taped it shut with duct tape. They tied her hands and feet, and then she started choking on the sock. One of the men then took it out and then stuffed it right back in because he's a douche. Then he put a knife to her throat. He said, "I'm just as good with a knife as I am with a gun," and he told her that he had killed a man in New York during a drug deal. He said nothing would happen to her, but Lene didn't believe him. She was terrified. All she could think was about her sister Tricia and her dad Rolf. They would be arriving any minute, and she was afraid the men would kill them too. But she didn't give up. She started thinking fairly fast. She remembered where the keys to the family car were kept. They couldn't drive the car all the way up the cabin, it was too snowy, but if she could escape and get down the hill, Maybe she could get to the road, and maybe she could get help. At that same moment, miles away, her sister Tricia felt something wasn't right. She was with her dad, Rolf, at the repair shop getting the snowmobile fixed, but suddenly she had a terrible feeling deep in her stomach. She told her dad something's wrong at the cabin. They called the cabin, but no one answered. The phone lines were dead. That was enough. Rolf and Tricia jumped into their snowmobile and then sped back towards the cabin. They arrived at around 2:45 p.m. As soon as they pulled in, this is when everything would go wrong. A man wearing a ski mask jumped out of the garage and he pointed a gun at them and told them to go inside. At the same time, Lene was dragged outside by another man. He held a knife to her throat. Rolf saw Lene. She could see it in his eyes that he knew something terrible had happened inside of that cabin and knew that Kay and Beth were probably gone. The men demanded money as Rolf gave them everything that he had. Then the man holding Lene told the other man to shoot Rolf. But the second didn't want to do it. So the first man took the gun himself. He fired once and nothing. Then he fired again, nothing. Then the third shot rang out and it hit. Rolf had been shot in the face. He fell onto the snowy ground. Tricia, standing right next to him, started screaming. She jumped up and down, crying. She was in absolute shock. Her dad had just been shot right in front of her. Then, one of the men grabbed both Tricia and Lene. He kept them outside while the other men dragged Rolf back inside of the cabin. Lene could hardly breathe. She thought the nightmare would never end. She and Tricia watched as the man poured gasoline all over their family cabin. T Tranquility, the place that had once felt safe, was then burned. Then, the man shot Rolf in the head once more. He lit a match and threw it inside. The fire exploded and flames roared up through the cabin, destroying everything. And then the man came running back out. The sisters were forced onto the snowmobiles. The two men told them to lead the way down to the family car, which was parked near a locked gate at the bottom of a long, snowy driveway. It was 2 miles away. The men needed the girls to open the gate. They knew the code. The girls had no choice but to obey, so they rode through the snow, their eyes filled with tears and their minds replaying the horror that they had just seen. Their mother, their father, their grandma, all gone. But what they didn't know was that someone was waiting at the bottom. It was Uncle Randy, Rolf's brother. He had planned to go snowmobiling with Rolf that day, and now he was standing right at the gate. As the girls approached, they saw him, and they knew it was dangerous. If the men found out Randy was family, he would be the next to die. So when Randy started talking to them, Tricia and Lene pretended to not know him. The men asked, "Who is that?" Lene answered quickly, "We don't know. He must think that we're someone else." They then rode on, hearts pounding, as Tricia started thinking even quicker at this point on how to get out of this situation. Maybe she could crash the snowmobile, maybe she could throw the man off, but she couldn't leave her sister behind. She had to stay strong, at least for the both of them. When they reached the car, the men forced them inside, and Tricia sat in the front passenger seat while Lene was put in the back, next to one of the other men. The girls were kept away from the doors, then the car sped off. It turned into a fast and wild chase, as mentioned, through the mountains. The car slipped, skidded, and then tumbled down a steep hill. When the car finally stopped, the girls looked up and police officers were everywhere pointing guns at them. Tricia felt relief, but also fear. The police didn't know that they were the victims. What if they shot them by mistake? She grabbed Lene's hand and said, "Duck," as they crouched down just in time. One of the men had pointed a gun at the officers, and the police fired back. A bullet tore through the car and missed Lene's head by just inches. When the two men were finally arrested, Lene then looked at the police and told them to kill the men. She said they had just murdered her mom, her dad, and her grandma. And I get due process. I'm sorry. This type of stuff, injustice, people like this who are just absolute animals, I know somebody has said it before where they're like, I'm surprised that you would hold that mentality. And it's like, I just don't see the point of having people like this in polite society. I genuinely don't. I don't understand why our tax dollars keep people like this alive. I don't understand how how two people could commit such a heinous, horrific crime and then just be like, okay, well, you get life in prison. It's just... And I get like due process exists because what if people are lying about the situation or it didn't go down as exactly intended? And obviously hindsight is 2020. We now know that they did this, which is why I can make this statement. And I'm not laughing at anybody. I'm more laughing at myself because it's like, yeah, if I was completely blind to the situation, had no idea, due process is what needs to happen. And that's the world that we live in because we don't have omniscience and an understanding and people can be lying. But since we do know that these guys did this and they are heinous animals, all I'm saying is, why continue to keep people like this around? That's just my 2 cents. Maybe it's a little barbaric. Maybe it's caveman ooga-doogieing. I don't know. But that's just how I feel about the situation. So Randy, we're gonna move on, was already talking to investigators. He told them that something had felt wrong the moment that he saw his nieces driving snowmobiles down the mountain. At first, he thought they might have brought some boyfriends back to visit, but when he saw their faces and how they didn't speak to him, he knew something was very wrong. When Randy got to the gate, he found Rolf bloody and barely alive, and he knew right away, fairly obviously, that something terrible had happened. At the hospital, doctors said it was even a miracle that Rolf was still alive. One bullet had gone through the side of his head, another one hit his face but didn't go all the way in. He was also burned and smelled like gasoline. Later, when Rolf was strong enough to talk, he told everyone what had happened. After the men set the house on fire and took his daughters, Rolf said he somehow stood up. He tried to put out the fire with his bare hands, but then he realized he was covered in gas and the fire was spreading. So Rolf ran to the bathroom, jumped in the shower, and cleaned off the gas. Then he changed into dry clothes, even though he had no coat and it was freezing. He ran outside with 2 bullets in his head and burns all over just to save his daughters, and he did. The 2 men were named Vaughn Lester Taylor, 25 years old, and Edward Stephen Deli, who was 21. They both had criminal records, and Vaughn had been in trouble for breaking into homes, and Edward had been arrested for starting fires. Before this happened, they were staying in a halfway house because they had been let out of prison. That's where they met. They were allowed to go out looking for jobs, but one day they didn't come back. They said they got rides from strangers to a town called Oakley, close to Beaver Springs, where Vaughn's family had a cabin. While up in the mountains, they broke into a few empty cabins and stayed there for several days. Investigators believe that on December 22nd, when the Tiede family left to go shopping, these 2 men broke into Tranquility Cabin. They saw the Christmas decorations and they knew someone lived there, but they waited. While they were hiding inside, they took showers, ate food, and even slept in the family's beds, just waiting for the family to come home. After the arrest, police rushed to the cabin hoping someone had survived, but what they found was absolutely heartbreaking. In the garage, there was a large puddle of frozen blood about 12 to 18 inches wide. There was a bloody shoe print nearby. Upstairs, the house was still burning and the air smelled like burned hair and clothes. There was blood all over the stairs, it was smeared on the walls, and the living room carpet was soaked so badly that the blood had gone through the floorboards. Because it was so cold, some of the blood had even turned to frozen icicles. Investigators followed bloody drag marks that led out to the deck, where they found Kay and Grandma Beth wrapped in a blanket and buried under the snow. Sadly, they were already gone. One officer said it looked like a war had happened inside of that cabin. But then the police found something rather unusual: the Tiede family's video camera. They took out the tape inside thinking it might be a recording of a happy family moment, but it wasn't. When they pressed play, they saw something that would be absolutely shocking. The 2 killers had filmed themselves opening the family's Christmas presents days before Christmas. Edward held the camera while Vaughn opened the gifts. One of them was a photo album. Vaughn stopped when he saw a picture of one of the girls, and he stared at it and started saying strange things. Later, when Edward was questioned by the police, he said he felt sick after they shot Kay and Beth. Well, it doesn't matter, Edward. Okay. He said there was blood and brain matter everywhere, and it made him throw up in the bathroom, and he claimed he took Lene to the bedroom just to calm her down and keep her from seeing all the blood. Wow, what a hero, bro. Vaughn, on the other hand, gave a different story. He first said he wasn't sure if he had fired the gun or not. Then he said he did shoot Kay because she wouldn't sit down when he told her to. He also said he didn't know why they hadn't killed Lene too. He said she was a nice girl and pretty, and that he felt bad for her, but neither of the men told the full truth because they are absolute douchebags, and both refused to say who had actually pulled the trigger. Okay, so it was both of you then. Investigators found out that around 10 a.m., someone had used the cabin's phone. It was Vaughn and Edward. They had called the halfway house that they came from and spoke to their old roommate, a man named Scott Manley. They told him they were at the cabin and were planning to kill the whole family: the husband, the wife, and the son. They had seen a family photo that includes Sean, but they didn't know he wasn't there. They also told Scott their horrible plan. After the murders, they would steal the family car and take the 2 girls, Lene and Tricia, to New York City. There, they would sell the girls to Satan worshippers who would then use them in evil rituals. But 2 days later, on December 24th, 1990, Vaughn and Edward were caught and officially charged. The charges include 2 counts of first-degree murder, 1 count of attempted first-degree murder, aggravated arson, 2 counts of aggravated kidnapping, aggravated robbery, theft, not stopping for police, and aggravated assault. Then Lene and Tricia got the news that their father, Rolf, had actually survived. He would obviously become their absolute hero. He helped save them by holding on just long enough for help to come by. But sadly, their mom and grandmother would not make it. Lene and Tricia didn't believe that one of the men was more guilty than the other. They thought both of them deserved the death penalty, and I am also in that camp with them. Kay, who was 49 years old, ended up dying that day. Her family said that she was one of the most loving and brave mothers that they had ever known. She would do anything to protect her children, even give her life. Her mother, 76-year-old Beth, also died, and people said that she was full of life, always happy, and full of energy even at her age. The autopsy showed that Kay died from a .44 caliber gunshot, and Beth had a .44 caliber wound to her head and then a .38 caliber wound to her chest. Either one could have been fatal. Clearly, both of these tools, because what I actually want to say will totally get this video destroyed, but very clearly they both pull the trigger on people. So Kay and Beth had a joint funeral. Kay's sister Claudia stepped in to help raise the girls while Rolf was still in the hospital. Claudia really believed that Vaughn was the mastermind and Edward just followed along, which does not matter. Edward had grown up in foster care, and when his foster mother found out about the murders 2 months later, she said she wished he killed her instead of hurting innocent people. When Vaughn and Edward showed up in court to hear their charges, they were laughing and smiling at each other, but that was the last time they'd ever be seen together. After that, their cases were separated. On May 1st, 1991, 5 months after the murders, Vaughn made a deal. He pled guilty to 2 counts of capital murder, and the state dropped the rest of the charges. His lawyer told the jury that even Vaughn thought his own crimes were awful and disgusting. A psychiatrist, Dr. Monich, said Vaughn confessed to killing both victims. He told the doctor that he emptied a .38 caliber gun on them, and he did the same with the .4 caliber. Okay. So Lene later told the court that she heard Vaughn say he had shot her grandma in the head twice. Vaughn then stood up in court to talk, but he said he didn't remember much. He said that he remembered pointing the gun, but didn't know if he actually fired it. He claimed everything happened so quickly, it was all a blur. But while he was on the stand, he got angry and didn't seem sorry at all. In the end, the court gave him the death penalty. Lene later said he was a bad man with no feelings, and you could see it in his eyes that he didn't care at all about what he did. Edward Deli chose to go to trial. His defense team said he didn't shoot anyone, but Lene and Tricia were ready to testify. The officer who had been with them through the whole investigation believed the girls were excellent witnesses. He said they remembered the details clearly and their stories always matched. Even though they were traumatized, they told everything in a calm and steady way. When Lene took the stand, she stared straight ahead like no one else was in the room. She answered questions, but she looked pale and distant. Both girls were asked to show the court what Edward had done using the real murder weapons. That meant they had to hold the guns that had actually killed their family. They did it, but later they said it felt wrong and very painful, and obviously this would be re-traumatizing. And during the trial, Edward looked shocked when Rolf walked into the courtroom. Edward didn't know that Rolf had actually survived. Rolf's face showed strength and sadness as he testified against him. On May 14th, 1991, Edward Deli was found guilty, but only of second-degree murder. He was sentenced to life in prison, as the Tiede family didn't agree with that decision, and neither do I. One juror refused to vote for first-degree murder, and the rest didn't want to put the girls through another long trial, so they settled for second degree. Tricia later said that she often cried in secret and she kept her pain, anger, and sadness inside. Lene said she searched for happiness in places where it didn't really exist. She was afraid everyone she loved would leave her. On July 1994, Vaughn, who was on death row, tried to appeal his case. Eat shit. He fired his lawyer and then said he had been given bad advice. He claimed his lawyer didn't explain the plea deal well, and that's why he said he was guilty. Eat shit. Vaughn also said no one had looked into his mental health during his trial. Boo-hoo. Okay, I gotta stop. His records show that he had a personality disorder and other mental health problems. He had a tough childhood, as he claims, and had a scar on his face, a learning disability, and it came from a family with drug problems. Later in life, he used drugs and even got involved in Satanism as well as witchcraft. He even apparently drank animal blood, but none of this was brought up during his trial. Still, the court found that the evidence against him was very strong. Lene saw the murders happen. Both girls saw the attempted murder and kidnapping, and the police officer saw Vaughn trying to escape with the girls as hostages. It turned out Vaughn had pled guilty because he didn't want to force the Tiede family or his own to sit through a painful trial. He also didn't want to testify against Edward. The court said his lawyer did a good enough job, and the case went back to Utah Supreme Court. On October 24th, 1997, Vaughn's conviction and death sentence was officially upheld. In 2011, Lene got a letter from Edward Deli. He told her he had changed. He said he wasn't the same bad boy who had done such a terrible thing, but Lene didn't answer right away. In fact, it would take her 9 years to reply. When she finally did, she said she forgave him, but not because he deserved it. She forgave him for herself. She said that after writing back, she finally felt free. Lene, Trisha, and her dad Rolf didn't want the evil to win, so they rebuilt the cabin those men had ruined. They made it even better than before, and Rolf always told Lene, lightning doesn't strike the same place twice. He reminded her that she was safe now and everything would be okay. The new cabin became a place of healing. The family started inviting friends and relatives again, and they made happy memories there. They promised never to let these men take anything else from them. The men took their mom and grandma, but that's where it stops. Lene married her high school sweetheart. Together, they have a big family with 9 kids. Trisha is a single mom of 2 girls, and for a long time, she was angry and confused. She didn't understand why something so awful happened to them, but now, when she looks into her daughter's eyes, she says she sees her mom and dad shining through. Rolf, their brave dad, passed away in 2008. His family was with them, and he helped his daughters heal in ways that no one else could. Claudia, Kay's sister, said that if Kay could see her girls now, she would be proud and she'd be smiling. Even years later, the shockwaves from what had happened that winter never really stopped. The ripple reached far beyond the cabin, and in a strange twist of fate, a local man named Dutch, just trying to do a good deed, found himself face to face with evil without even knowing it. Dutch, who owned a corner store with his brother, gave a stranger a lift to what he thought was a broken down car. That stranger turned out to be one of the killers. Dutch survived that day, but it changed how he saw the world. He never forgot how close he came to danger, and he quietly vowed never to trust someone at face value again. Years went by, but the courtroom doors never stayed shut for long. Vaughn Taylor, locked up on death row, kept filing appeals, and he tried to shift the blame, saying Edward had been the one to actually fire the gun. A new ballistics report gave some weight to that idea, but the law in Utah is simple and strict. If you're part of a crime, you carry the guilt, no matter who pulled the trigger. Vaughn's sentence stood firm. As for the Tiede family, they endured what most of us couldn't even imagine, but somehow they held on to each other. Kay's mother didn't hesitate to run towards danger, even at her age. Her daughters thought fast and helped protect their uncle, who was clinging to life. Rolf, bleeding and broken, forced himself to stay alive just to make sure his girls had a chance. They didn't crumble, and they rebuilt their lives. They rebuilt the cabin too, not as a place of pain, but as a symbol of healing. They chose to keep living and to keep loving, and not to let that terrible night define them. What they showed wasn't just survival, it was courage, the kind that comes quietly day by day and never gives up. So now that we are at the end of this, I think you guys probably have a pretty clear idea on how I feel about this. Essentially, again, people like this, to me, they're animals. It's something is broken in their brain, and it is such a horrific just mentality to have that it's like, I know people can be rehabilitated. People like this, I don't believe can be rehabilitated. And I'm not really sure what the process needs to look like. I know I have, I'm human. I have my own personal beliefs on retribution and justice and vengeance and all this type of deal. But I think both of them should get the death penalty. I don't think Edward should be allowed to live any longer. I believe Vaughn has been already executed. Let me fact check that real quick. So evidently, as I now look at this, apparently they don't have the necessary chemicals to carry out the execution, so he'll be executed by firing squad under law. So here's 2 ways to think about it, right? There's a lot of people that watch this channel, and everybody has different opinions, especially when it comes to criminals being put to death when they kill other people. I am from the ideology of 1 for 1. If you kill somebody, especially in such a heinous way, I believe you deserve to die. That is, like, you don't get rehabilitated, you don't get let back out in society, you don't get to rejoin anything. Like, you took a life in a horrible, horrible fashion, and you didn't think much about it then, so as payment, your life gets taken as well. And there's some people who believe that, you know, and within good reason, right? Because it's not like the death penalty has always been correct. People have been put to death in the past, and then it was found that they should have been exonerated, and they weren't actually guilty of what they've been accused of. I believe in this instance, and if you look at death penalties, they typically are very, like, they last for a while. This guy, I believe, has been, like, he was just reinstated to be in the death penalty. I believe it was in 2020, Vaughn specifically, his was overturned, and then in 2021 it was reinstated. Now we're in 2025. So I believe he's been on there for like 35 years. No, I guess it would be 32 years. So I know I'm kind of rambling at this point. I want you guys to understand kind of my thought process on it, because some people, I believe, think I'm like barbaric, but it's just, it's such a horrible and disgusting mentality to have that I'm just like, I cannot rationalize it with the brain that I have on why either of these two would still be alive. It does not make sense to me. But let me know what you guys think down in the comments. I'm sure, some people will disagree. That's fine. I'm sure some people might agree. That's fine too. I'm not telling you that you have to basically adopt my mentality, and that's the beauty of having our own individuality, I suppose. But anyways, I want to thank you guys for watching. I hope you enjoyed learning about this, even if the topic is maybe not as enjoyable as one might guess. And my bad for cutting in so much with comments, because I just can't stand these two. But anyways, I want to thank my patrons real quick. At the Literal Wendigo tier, we have Grayson West, Invictus Echo, Monkey Man, and Scrungle. Thank you guys for your awesome support. At the Eyewitness to the Event tier, we have Beaver Malaga and Dragon Master Knight. At the Secondhand Accounts tier, we have Bianca, Fred Rush, Stutz, and Troy. And to the rest of my patrons, your support is greatly appreciated, because you guys don't have to do it, but you choose to anyways, so thank you. But alright, that's gonna do it for me. I hope, again, you enjoyed learning about this, and I will see y'all in the next one.